I provide Studio One training online using Zoom, and for the past couple of months, I've had different students who are having issues and questions about song file management in Studio One, so I figured I would go ahead and put together a tutorial that goes into depth on this topic for anyone else who may be having issues with this particular aspect of Studio One. If you're not careful and don't have a firm understanding of this topic, you can easily end up with a mess on your hands and have songs scattered all over the place. And I've seen songs nested in songs, missing files and samples, and some people just can't find the music they've been working on because particular folders and files have been moved around on their hard drive. So let's just go ahead and dive right in and take a look at this. And one of the most important areas that you need to be familiar with is the content location. And if we Control, comma, or Command, comma on the Mac, then we can bring up our options menu for Studio One. Now we're on the General tab and we need to change to the Locations. And then here we have User Data. Now this is very important here. So this is where the file path where all of our songs, presets, shows, etc. are going to be saved at. Now, by default, Studio One is going to put this in your Documents folder. So C, Users, Brand, then it would be something like Documents. So you should see something like that if you haven't changed the default. Now, I did change this to be on my desktop in a Quanta Audio folder, and then I created a folder for Studio One so the songs, projects, shows, etc. are contained there. So if I go ahead and open up the Explorer window here, let's pull that down a little bit. Then we can see that the desktop, Quanta Audio, Studio One, and then as it says here, songs, project, shows, presets, we can see presets, projects, shows, songs are all here within the Studio One folder. And it's important to make note that I created specifically the Studio One folder to contain these in. So if you don't create a Studio One folder, these project shows and various folders will be placed loosely in whatever folder that you choose. So it's important that wherever you decide to place them, you create the Studio One folder first so that everything will be contained within there and it will be a lot cleaner. Now I'm sure some of you are going to judge me for placing this on the desktop and on the same drive as my system, but due to various reasons that I won't go into, this is just how I need to have things set up. I actually don't have any performance issues with my system with this setup like this. And I think that in the past, it's been more important to have a separate drive where you place your songs and any sample libraries that you have so that they don't compete with the operating system for read-write access. But with modern SSD solid-state drives, this is less of an issue, particularly if you're working on smaller songs and you're not recording tons and tons of audio tracks at a time. I personally have not noticed a single performance issue on my system with having this set on my desktop and using it on the same drive as my operating system. However, in an ideal world, if I were in a permanent location, I'd build myself a PC. I'd have 3 drives, one for my operating system and applications, a second one for my Studio One files and sample libraries, and then I'd have a third one for backing everything up to it. So now if I double click on the songs here, then we can see I have finished tracks and in progress. I also created these folders to help me manage all of the songs that I'm working with. And let's go ahead and minimize the Explorer and we'll cancel out of here. And this ties in with these tabs here, songs, projects, and shows. So if I click on songs, then we can see those folders that I created, the finished tracks and in progress. And then if I expand this out, then we can see what's contained in here. So in progress, you can see that this all matches up. And so this is also important to think about. If you're someone who's creating tons of songs on a regular basis, you need to come up with some sort of system to help you organize. If you're really prolific and writing tons of music, then you may even want to create folders for each month and place those folders into a year. So for instance, 2023, you can have folders for each month and they contain the songs that you worked on in that month, however works for you. But just know that we can come up to the top here and create a folder. So we can create one for the month of February and then start putting songs in there. and then just nest folders in an organizational structure that works best for you. Let's actually right-click and delete that out. And at the top, we also have a search field, so we can go there and use that to find our songs as well. Clicking on the X will return back to the previous screen. And let's come back to the recent files, and then everything that you've recently opened up is going to show here. And if you'd like, these will dynamically update. So these will be pushed down as you begin to create and work with new songs. If you'd like anything to stick around, then you can come to the edge and click on the pin icon. And then that's going to pin these to their current location. And then we can click on this arrow and see all of our pinned songs there. If we'd like to remove, then we can just click once on the pin and we're back to the default. Now we've taken a look at the songs and seen the finished tracks and in progress. If we come to projects, then this is actually empty as well as the shows. And that's because if we come back to the Explorer and we'll come to the Studio One folder, and then we have our projects here. If I double click, then we can see I don't have any projects in here. So that's why these are listed. But if I did, then these would be show up here within our start page. Let's come back to the Studio One. Minimize our Explorer. So we've seen by control comma that this is important, our user data location. And the next area that you need to be very mindful of is when we're creating the new song. I'm going to Control N to bring up the new song dialog. And then here we have a path where we can choose the location where our new song is going to go. So right now, this is set for the desktop Quanta Audio Studio One songs in progress. So all of the songs that I'm currently working on, that's where it's set, where I have it set by default. But I actually changed that just for an example for this tutorial. Normally, we can click on this ellipsis, and for me, I set this to my desktop and select that folder because 90% of the music that I start working on, I don't keep. I'm kind of a perfectionist and judgmental about my music. So putting it on the desktop allows me to delete it pretty easily if I'm not going to keep it. If I decide it's something I want to continue to work on, then I'll manually drag that folder to the desktop Studio One in progress songs folder. Now, as far as the name of the song, it's going to default to the current date and the name Quanta here, and that's because I have the name Quanta here. So whatever name you've put in here for your artist, then it's going to add that to the end of the date. So now that I've changed this to the desktop, let's actually rename this to Tutorial Song, and we'll go ahead and click on OK. And then now if I come to the desktop, then we can see that a folder has been created for Tutorial Song. And if we double click on that, within there, it's empty. Let's minimize. And I'm going to press T as in Tom to add an audio track. Let's expand that out by Shift and E. I'm going to press R to arm for record. Enter into record. Check 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2, 3. Let's stop that recording. And we'll come back to our Explorer window. And then now we can see that in our tutorial song folder, we have cache and media. So if I double click on this, we have images, and this is basically our waveform, I'm pretty sure. And then the cache, tutorial song. We also have a media folder that was created, and that contains our vocal recording. And this actually ties in with the pool. So if we come to the browser here and then come to the pool, we can see that vocal recording here as well. Now let's actually come back to the browser and we'll come to the loops. So if you work with a loop and I drag this in, and then let's come back to our Explorer, and we can see the media folder hasn't changed though for this. But if we come to the tutorial song and go to the cache audio, then we can see that that loop I brought in is added to our cache folder. Let's come back to the tutorial song, minimize our Explorer, And now I'm going to come to the Files tab, and I'm actually going to drag in a sample from one of my sample libraries that I have. Let's come back to our Explorer, Media, and we can see we only have our vocal recording. Let's minimize. I'm going to Control S to save. And now we're presented with this dialog asking us if we want to copy the external files to the media folder. Now, if you don't copy this paper hat that we just dragged in from the sample library into our song, then Studio One's just going to keep a reference to its location on the hard drive. And it's not actually going to be contained within your song folder. And for me, I personally like to have all of the samples that I use contained within the song folder so that if anything gets moved around in the system or I want to share that project or the song with someone else, then they're going to have all of the samples that they need to do whatever they need to do. So I'm going to go ahead and click yes. And then now when we come back to our Explorer, we can see that our paper hat has been added to the media folder within our tutorial song. And we can see that we now have a song file .song after we've saved, and that's all contained within our tutorial song folder. Now, by default, Studio One is not going to ask you if you want to save those external samples. So if we Control comma to bring up our options menu, just know that if you would like for Studio One to ask you to save any external samples to your song folder, be sure that you check this box here. And also notice that we have Enable Autosave, and that's set for 5 minutes. And I believe it's been about 5 minutes. So let's come back to our tutorial song folder. And we don't have a history folder yet. Let's actually Control W, and then we'll reopen the song. And we'll just leave this open for a little bit, and eventually we'll have autosave versions that show up here in just a moment. Another thing that I want to mention is that if we were to, say, come to this plastic tub, right-click, and send that to a new sample 1. Okay, so we've now got that loaded into a sample 1. Let's Control S. Okay, now it's also going to ask us if we'd like to save any external samples that we've loaded into sample 1 or impact, for instance. I'll go ahead and click yes. So now when we come back to our song folder, then we can see there's a samples folder that pops up for our plastic tub that we loaded into sample 1. We can see that there. And in our media, we can see that it's not there because it's differentiated as a sample within sample 1. Let's go ahead and close out our Explorer window, and then we'll come up to the File and then choose the Save As. And this is going to save a new version of the settings within our song. So we'll just call this tutorial song 2, press enter. And now when we come to our folder for the tutorial song, we can see that that new Save As is going to be here. So if you've reached a point in your song where you're going to move on to, say, mixing or something like that, you can create a new version to begin working on, and then that way you can always go back to your original if you have made any errors or you want to just start over and begin with what you've completed in the first song. And we'll double click on the original to open that back up. Now let's actually come back to our options menu, and then we can change our save time by click, hold, and dragging. And I'm just going to take this down really low, and I wouldn't recommend setting it at that. It could drive you crazy, but let's apply that. But I want to set it low so that I can show the history folder within our song folder. And this should be created after Studio One has done an autosave. Okay, so a bit of time has passed for that autosave new setting every 34 seconds to do some things. So let's come back to our Explorer window. And then we can see that we have our initial 2 that we created, the tutorial song and the song 2. We also have a autosave here, but we also have a history folder where all of the following autosaves are going to be saved within here. So anytime that you want to go back in history, they're going to be in this history folder. But you can also, let's come back out to the main folder, minimize, and then we'll come to the start page. When we see this tutorial song here, we can right-click in our recent files list, and then we can see those two versions available here with the date and timestamp. So if you've ever really messed up a song and you need to go back in time, just remember that you can right-click on the song name, and then you're going to have a bunch of different autosave versions available. And some people, some of the students that I work with, they don't like all of those autosaves because they think it's going to take up space on their hard drive. But if we look at these files, they're just 24 kilobytes, 23. So in my opinion, it's better to go ahead and keep them and have something that you can go back to in case you need to, in the case of a disaster, than to remove them at such a small size. Now, the final thing I'll mention is if we come back to the options menu, we also have a use cache plugin data on save. Now, this is useful if you are working with tons and tons of tracks, like 100 or more tracks, you're composing orchestral music or something like that. This is supposed to help you with save time when you Control S or autosave. This is supposed to help you save those larger projects more quickly. But it could introduce issues, so only use it if you're experiencing long save times, and this may help you out, but it could also cause you some issues, so you can experiment with that if you're someone who's working on incredibly large projects. Otherwise, I've never had that on, and I leave it off. Okay, so this has been a deep dive into managing our songs and the song file structure of Studio One. I hope it's been helpful. If you're interested in any one-on-one training, check out the description or the pinned comments below, and I will see you in the next tutorial.